the bright lights of Hollywood, and the girl heads off to make her break in stardom. That's pretty much one of the stories that oldest time as in Hollywood itself. And this week, we're going to talk about it with The Star is Born and the different versions that's been made over the years. I'm John Chang, and here again, of course, we have Dan Edmonds. And
Hello.
so I think this time around, probably one of the basic ideas that really is at the heart of this story to me is about our fascination with celebrities and stuff. And I don't know if you can kind of talk a little bit about what your thoughts are about, like kind of why are we so fascinated with stars and celebrities?
Well, my basic idea on this is that for the last sort of couple of 100 years, society in general has been getting less and less religious, and science rationality has been taking over. But we still have this deep desire for storytelling, and storytelling is sort of is where philosophy and emotions kind of meet, which is why it has such a sort of grasp over us. And I sort of felt that over the years, things like the movie theatre has kind of replaced churches in a way for the community. And much as we kind of know that these people aren't perfect, we still idolize them, literally the word. And it's no wonder that people start sort of imitating, Jesus-like sort of imagery in their music videos or movies and things like this. So that's why I think the main fascination that we have, with celebrities.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it just reminded me of that one song, "Personal Jesus." It was like kind of that's even the literal name of the song. That kind of really says it all.
Yeah, and I think it's they are the great sort of storytellers that everyone knows. Not everyone, but large populations of people know the stories, so they have this kind of sway over our lives, which I think is why we have the fascination. And one of the points in the movie is this idea of celebrities' lives are scripted for us as well. It's the news media wants to create a story. The studios want to create another different story about their life. So that will become sort of interwoven in this kind of mythology almost about the people.
Yeah, mythology is a great word for it because we have like kind of within the stars, like kind of this sainthood that is sometimes, this picture that's painted about how they're these, people that we really look up to, and is to their detriment because a lot of times they're very much human, and other times like very flawed individuals where, like kind of because we kind of put all these expectations on them, it's a lot of pressure, and also other times it's where we're just setting ourselves to be let down by the fact that like they're just going to be human, like kind of they're going to have failings and they're not going to be perfect all the time. I remember a few different posts on Quora where some people talk about like kind of their one occurrence or one chance encounter with a celebrity, and it didn't go the best way, whatever, and so that's in their mind like kind of like, oh, this person is rude or obnoxious when they're off screen and stuff like that. But like people have bad days. I mean, I know I've certainly had plenty of different ones, and if you catch me on one of those off days, you'll probably think that like, oh, what a douchebag or whatever and stuff. But then other times, like kind of people, like, at least I hope anyways, they generally think like, oh, John's pretty cool. He's really somebody I can really hang with and stuff like that. So I think that's the thing that like we really put all these huge expectations onto celebrities that like really just can be unfair. We and then the other part is that like what we saw also is like throughout the different versions of A Star is Born is how people feel like they own a piece of these folks, like kind of besides the autographs and stuff, different times like we want to reach out and touch them, like kind of just even again like that one song, and then other times we like kind of and then there's a few other versions where, in fact, the one I just recently watched with 76, the one guy like insists on the main character, in this case, Kristofferson, as John Norman, to get up and sing and stuff, like kind of almost like kind of for we want or expect the celebrities kind of perform on cue, kind of because we quote
Yeah.
unquote own them. And I think that's, again,
Yeah.
just really unreasonable as an expectation.
Yeah. We've invested our money in all their albums.
Right.
Surely we need a return on that investment, you know? Yeah, they're not allowed to have a bad day, more or less. And that's what all of these films have as a great theme, is this idea that, you know, human failing it doesn't coexist with the machinations of a movie industry. Yeah, definitely that. And I mean, this whole thing of your lack of anonymity is another thing that they really highlight in this movie, is that not only is all your greatest sort of moments captured on film, but all your worst moments as well. So having your entire life no longer anonymous, and I mean, I've heard, you know, if you hear celebrities talking about that, it's quite a different sort of experience. You can never be a nobody in a crowd ever again. You know, you have to live your life as a known person. So, you know, they try and sort of highlight in that aspect of it in the movies as well.
And I wonder if, you know, putting these kinds of pressures and stuff, besides the pressures of performing and, you know, like kind of, you know, if like the movie or the song doesn't make, you know, kind of, you know, these record sales and stuff like that, I wonder if the expectations of their celebrity status ends up causing some of the, you know, addiction and stuff where, you know, like more recent kind of, you know, contemporary version of that I can think of is Amy Winehouse, who, you know, like watching her biopic and stuff, it's like you really see this person unraveling before you, like kind of just, you know, progressively over time and stuff. And I think, you know, like that's like a, you know, one of those where it's almost like a movie in itself. And then we see this in The Star Is Born, where, you know, whether it's Norman Maine or, you know, John Norman, stuff like that, like this person who maybe at one point was a star and, you know, performing, you know, like kind of the way he was expected and stuff. But then, you know, as the pressures of like kind of, you know, people constantly going up to him and people constantly, you know, demanding of his time and stuff like that, then after a while, you just almost see it as like, you know, the addiction as a way to kind of numb the pressures and stuff, to numb the, you know, all these demands and everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think absolutely. And I think with the sheer number of suicides in you know, the entertainment industry makes you realize, you know, and I think this really goes back to that thing of the religious thing. The expectations on these people is so high, and their own self-belief, their own ego is what kind of fuels these beliefs in themselves as well. Hence why suicide is an option for some, because they are completely invested, like everyone who's surrounding them, in their own ego being portrayed on film. So, and that becomes their reality rather than any kind of, you know, intrinsic sort of personhood, we'll say, or in terms of a sort of rather Freudian interpretation of it. But I mean, in terms of the addiction, I think it's a very simple equation, right? Money, probably not much of a barrier, surrounded by beautiful people, and you've got to be kind of secluded from the rest of the general public most of the time so that people don't capture you doing things at your worst. So, you know, escapism and lots of money and beautiful people probably thinks, yeah, I could probably develop a cocaine habit, you know, quite easily in those circumstances. It's, yeah.
And I think, you know, speaking of like kind of, you know, cocaine, or like, it's interesting how we see like throughout these different versions that, you know, the addiction, of course, is, you know, to alcohol, like kind of mainly for the first couple versions and stuff. And then,
Yeah.
and I guess even with, you know, 54 with Judy Garland and James Mason and stuff, it's still alcohol. But I think the part of where like life imitating art and stuff was, by that point, from what I understand, you know, Garland had a reputation for her addiction to, you know, just a variety of prescription drugs that were just basically just, you know, fed to her and stuff. So I think, you know, that's probably where we start seeing like kind of, on the one hand, the influence of, you know, harder drugs, so to speak, but on the other, you know, Hollywood and people in general just still didn't really know how to deal with it. Like, you know, there's probably no such thing. I guess there was no such thing as AA back then,
Mm.
And just like kind of just basically addiction was still treated as this thing that like where initially they kind of joked it off and kind of like the first couple of versions you had a lot of that kind of attitude, and then after a while I kind of just started being less funny. It kind of like it just was no longer the funny drunk kind of thing and stuff. It was like, you know, in fact I think you really see that where you know, with James Mason they still kind of like treat it as a little bit of a gag but by the end of the movie it's really like kind of not only kind of embarrassing, but it's like kind of just really humiliating in a lot of ways in terms of how it's
Yeah.
treated and stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, you see that over the progression of the movies as well. The drugs change. They're sort of alcohol, and it becomes cocaine and booze, and then it becomes prescription drugs and booze in the 2018 version.
Right.
And I think part of that is to do with this kind of acceptance that, you know, prescription drugs maybe sort of is as a celebrity who's probably got some kind of problem. You're saying, well, I can't do cocaine because that's obviously bad. But if I'm seeing a doctor and he's giving me something, well, surely that's kind of something, right? That can't be what bad is. That must be how it kind of works the acceptance into the, you know, into their lives, so to speak.
Yeah, and from what I understand too, with addicts, there's a lot of that kind of rationality that they go into. You know, they kind of basically play these mind games where it's like, you know, oh, I'm not drinking, you know, so taking drugs is, you know, quote unquote better because then I'm not drinking then. Or other times, like, you know, it's the other way around where like, oh, you know, like it's only a drink and stuff instead of, you know, I'm you know, kind of weaning myself off the drugs, so to speak. And but what I believe, anyways, is like after a while, you know, my understanding of addiction is like you realize after a while it's just addiction is addiction, where it doesn't matter what you're taking and stuff like that. It's still a coping mechanism. It's still a way to kind of deal with things, and not to like kind of deal with them the way you really need to, which is like, of course, just, you know, quitting and just and that's the other thing I think that we still have slowly been shifting to the understanding of it too, that where you're never really cured, which is like something that like you see like kind of in the early versions and stuff. In fact, something that's echoed with Esther's, you know, she says it over and over again, is like, it's just not enough, is it? She wants to like kind of solve the problem. And that's like a lot of the attitudes that we still have with addiction, even that we just treat it as something that like, oh, it can be solved, it can be cured. It can be managed, but my understanding is it's not really something that you can really ever just, you know, cure per se.
The most effective ones I've heard over the I'm trying to pronounce it, psilocybin, the LSD one. That's supposed to be more effective, but yeah, I mean, I think as well the other thing that was noticeable was that alcoholism is definitely defined as a disease in the 2018 version, whereas in the previous ones it's kind of just alluded to just being pretty terrible for this character.
Right.
The other thing that I don't know if it's the way the movies are structured, but it seemed to me in the 37 one, there's so much cynicism around Hollywood as a sort of a movie industry that you kind of sympathize with Maine's character, and you don't necessarily attribute his suicide entirely to the alcoholism. I mean, that's kind of what I kind of felt like half of it was him completely invested in his career and in it seeing and watching himself going into obscurity. So that was one of the things I don't know, maybe. The other thing I was going to say was, in terms of celebrities and addiction, most celebrities already have like a want for a lot of attention to begin with, right? Obviously, otherwise you wouldn't want to become famous in the first place. And I'm guessing standing in front of lots of people who are cheering your name must fire your dopamine receptors pretty majorly. And so if your career starts to wane, then you're probably going to be looking for that kind of natural, the equivalent of that natural high, or the sort of the meaning and everything else. So, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's a very extreme human experiences we're looking at. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's something that I think isn't as like obvious, is the kind of connection between the high you get as a celebrity and stuff, and the highs that you kind of are looking for, you know, through drugs different times as like a substitute, right, for that. And in other words, we tend to think of it as like kind of the drugs as like kind of something where it's just something that they're doing on the side, so to speak, and everything. And I think what that kind of, what I'm thinking that, based on what you said, is like it's in a way that like they're trying to keep the high going and stuff, when they're off the stage and everything. And then, like you said, with the case of Maine, where like he's, like kind of fading and stuff, a fading star, that's like kind of where there's even more of a craving, there's even more hunger for getting back into the limelight. And then it's even harder where the things that he's doing, where he's drinking and he's kind of making a mess of himself, that's kind of pushing him even more away from, kind of that stardom and stuff. So it's like kind of a vicious cycle where, as they kind of talk about this downward spiral in that case.
Yeah. I think as well, the other bit for me was the Esther's character there's this clear sort of path that he's on the way down, she's on the way up.
Right.
She's the rising star, he's the dying star. Hence why you have this imagery of the sun setting when sort of Mason walks into the sea at the end. And I think as well, it's kind of like at the start, the lamps are firing up at the beginning of the 1954, and it has this. They almost has like they've sort of over emphasized the sound effect a bit like kind of how David Lynch does in a lot of his stuff with these lamps firing. It's almost like you can say, okay, that's the birth of the star going off there. But it's but Esther has this. It's I think part of the movie is this normalization of addictive behavior as well, in that she kind of gets used to him being drunk all the time. That's how she knows him, and it's kind of it shows you the dangers of kind of just normalizing that kind of thing and making it business as usual, because it catches in every single one. It catches Esther. The suicide catches Esther off guard. So she is very much sort of shocked by it, as I suppose the audience is supposed to be as well. But there's this kind of thing of normalizing dysfunctional and addictive sort of behavior in relationships. Right. This is quite a central part of the story as well, for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding of addiction different times too, is that like you really have only two relationships, whereas, in each case it's codependency. So you have the addict, and then you have the people that enable the addict and stuff. And, it's really hard to separate the two, because they just, kind of are caught in this kind of vicious cycle of supporting each other. And, the basically, like you said, that the addict is kind of just, trapped in his own kind of cycle of addiction and, kind of the ups and downs of that. And then meanwhile, the enablers are the people around them who are also caught in the kind of, just basically cleaning up the mess each time and stuff. And, maybe a lot of times resenting it, but yet they're, by the fact that like they're cleaning it up and the addict never really is dealing with the consequences, it's basically, kind of just helping it along, so to speak. So, yeah,
I mean, and that sort of feedback loop of the dysfunctional behavior is that much more, your responsibility is so much more removed as a celebrity, because you have other people to manage all of the things for you, which is probably why it spirals more out of control. I mean, if you're an average person, well, if you don't show up to work because you're going to get fired, you're going to find the outcomes of your addiction are going to hit home pretty quickly. So
definitely. So I think that's like kind of, one of the things we kind of talked about is this cost of fame and stuff. And that's the thing that like, what's interesting about, like kind of the different versions is that we see the price, like kind of pretty much the same in the sense of where it's the people have to kind of, give up a lot of themselves. Probably like in the very first versions, like it's kind of, again, treated with like more comic relief a little bit, where in each case they're trying to make Esther into this something else, like kind of, where with Judy Garland, they're putting on this kind of blondish wig and everything, and which apparently, like kind of is a bit of a parody of what happened to her with, Wizard of Oz, that she, like, they tried to basically make her up into this other version and stuff like that until, like, somebody, I guess, I think it might have been even the director, Cooker or stuff like that, that he like saw like, what are we doing? Like got into,
Yeah.
this natural star and stuff like that. And, they kind of went back with her more natural look of being at least a brunette, just, like kind of, even though that's still kind of different from her actual hair, I guess, and stuff, but it was at least a little bit more natural and everything. And I think that's the thing that like we kind of, that on the one hand, the stars and the celebrities, we like kind of, there's this kind of quality that like is we believe is innate to an actor or celebrity and stuff like that. But the other, like we still try to, I guess, enhance like kind of what's there, and to the detriment, like kind of to sometimes we're making them something that like I mean they can sometimes not even recognize themselves as much.
Well, I think that's highlighted in the title itself, actually, in the 37 movie, because I think the title is actually very cynical, really, because we have this idea that stars are discovered, it's an organic process, and they've just been found. But I mean, it's kind of what they tried to show in the 1937 one. It's a very manufactured process, and it's like you said, it's not so much the star is born. It's kind of like they have IVF and they get selectively, bred and adapted on their way to stardom. Rather than, so yeah.
And I think that's kind of in a way what's kind of created this myth that that's the way it happens, like kind of that you're discovered and stuff. I mean, those things do happen, but like having worked around Hollywood to some degree, I could tell you that like the real working actors that I know, they work at it. They are like kind of constantly hustling and auditioning and stuff. In fact, there's this one video with Bryce Dallas Howard, Ron Howard's daughter, who's now, like initially she struggled to kind of, find her footing, but then she's kind of really kind of started to kind of get to be on her own, and that's a whole other discussion about like kind of, when you in the shadow of a, celebrity parent and stuff like that. But she talks about how like, her grandmother apparently, who is also an actress, and that's the other part about all this too, is like kind of the cronyism / inbreeding that happens, is that like she, the grandmother told her that like, that it expects about 200 auditions or so before you get that one, choice role and everything. And and she said that like it really, she confirms it by her experience that like it's about that. And that's the thing that like we really don't see, is like how much of that hustle, how much of that work is really, the things that they had to put up with. And then even like somebody like Bryan Cranston, who I recently listened to his story, he was again like kind of way before he was Walter White on Breaking Bad. He was the dad in Malcolm in the Middle, and then a lot of the other kind of similar roles where he was just somebody, right? And so we see like kind of the celebrities and when they make it, but we don't, or we rarely see like on all the other steps that led to that point.
Yeah, we don't see the preceding 10 years of struggling.
Yeah. The times that they put up with the shitty jobs and the kind of the stuff that like where somebody probably like was at those kind of jobs, was like laughing at them for like what are you going for the audition things for and stuff, and just all the other kind of humiliation along the way that probably similarly had to put up with and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean I think that there's definitely in one of the core themes is this humiliation and the sort of the lack of dignity in a lot of the stuff in terms of Hollywood. The other theme I think is this idea of tragedy as a test of courage. It's another sort of big theme that comes into it, and that is sort of, I think, it depends how you want to view the different versions, but there's something pretty in the 1954 one. There's this idea of the show must go on, so to speak,
right.
and that something happens, and then she does a song and dance number right after it. You can kind of, I mean, as a viewer, it's kind of, well, I personally felt it kind of took me out of the drama a little bit, but you can also see the point they're kind of trying to make. And,
right.
You just have to read about some of the lives of celebrities like Kelsey Grammer and Keanu Reeves, and there's so much kind of tragedy in their lives that, it's obviously, I don't know why they, it's an interesting point though as to why they want to make that in a film.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Let's kind of dive into that a little bit. Like, kind of, let's look at like kind of the strengths and weaknesses of the different versions and stuff. And then rather than kind of doing linearly, you know, like let's start with that one. Let's start with 1954. Like at that point, that's the second if we go by the official kind of, you know, versions and stuff. Third in the sense of like kind of the way the story's been made, because of the one version that we, you know, like that wasn't called A Star Is Born, was What Price Hollywood, which was kind of the original version, and that one of course isn't as recognized because of the fact that like at that point apparently like you know, they didn't have the same issues with copyright, I guess, or I don't know. It's like somehow that one they managed to avoid being sued, I guess, and stuff. It was depression, I guess.
I read about that. Yeah,
maybe it was like just too much. There's probably nothing that they would be getting if they sued. There's probably nobody to sue, I guess, or something like that.
Yeah. No, I mean the 54 version is probably the most sort of Hollywood of all of them, I would say, and it's very lavish, big sort of budget. You've got some real major stars, and it's kind of it. Although I feel the 37 version is the most cynical, but I would say it has a lot of more realism than the 37 version, in that Esther is already a kind of a working person doing like commercials and things like this. So she's already in the industry. And Mason does, I mean, I found he started the first 10 minutes, he's just like a complete sort of egomaniac, and then transforms into the perfect English gent within about sort of 10 minutes, which was a bit, I mean, I suppose you could, you know, maybe that is what, you know, incredible drunks in Hollywood are like, who knows, but it was quite a major kind of transformation. I felt like he was, as a character, he was sort of orbiting around Judy Garland, and he had to sort of pull out various sort of bits of personal experience to fit those moments in between song and dance numbers, which I kind of found a little bit of a shame, because I actually really liked his character in the 37 version. I felt like he's a much more central character. It is almost as much both of their stories in the first one, I feel.
Yeah.
This one, he was more
I do feel like kind of different times, one of the things with acting too is like you have to have a you know, like besides the kind of classic hero versus villain thing stuff, in this case it's the romance, where if you have like with the romance there has to be some kind of you know, balance between the characters, in the sense of where, you know, like if you have like a really strong female and then like the male character that we just don't buy as like kind of as a counter to that. I think that's like kind of one of the weaknesses of any kind of, you know, romantic kind of movie and stuff. And I think in this case, Mason, you know, does come across as like having this the yang, I guess, for, you know, Judy's you know, Garland's yang and stuff. So I do buy that, and I think the thing that like you know, maybe what they were trying to do, and you know, this is me kind of maybe you know, projecting in a way. But I feel like that they wanted to kind of really show his way that like alcoholism like affected him, where he becomes a very different kind of, you know, you know, creature, I guess, in a way. And so that I kind of bought, like kind of, you know, I feel like he did a strong enough performance of where he kind of showed like kind of this, you know, Jekyll and Hyde kind of personality with alcohol, and that's something that like I think with some of the other versions. And that's the thing that we haven't really talked about there with the 2018 version and stuff, is that like I feel like that's the other one that kind of really shows that to some degree, of like where we really see how, besides like kind of the parts of where in the moments that the person is grabbed by the addiction and stuff, but then how they really become a change or become a very different person and stuff. So that one I kind of saw was like kind of overall like, you know, just two strong performances. And then, like you said, like just hugely Hollywood, you know, production and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, Judy Garland's performance is just so. I mean, it's an intense performance. It's like she is. It's like relentless. It's like Judy Garland, 120%. Despite whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but definitely she works hard at that role, and who knows what prescription jokes were required to pull that out, because it's like 3 solid hours hours of, but yeah, I mean, yeah, she definitely, and she, I mean, you know, she's an amazing performer anyway, really. So it's after
Well,
2 hours, I was kind of a little bit over a Judy Garland singer. That, yeah, okay, maybe a few less songs, but yeah.
I mean, I guess that's the thing. Like you said, what stretched it out to, you know, like kind of almost that third hour and stuff like that is the fact that like it's mostly made up of her numbers and everything, and that's really is her like kind of singing her heart out, dancing her heart out, and you really see that like she's giving her all. And part of I think the context of that is that like it's been 4 years since she's made a film, and you know like I think at that time a lot of Hollywood saw her as a has been. So that's
Mm.
again kind of the art imitating life where she's like you know like on her way out. She's the Norman Maine of you
Yeah.
know in real life, and I think at that point like she's like and here's the thing I feel like when I'm watching those moments that she's breaking down stuff like that, it's almost in a way she's talking to herself. And I
Mm.
don't know if she saw it that way, but that's how I felt watching it. I mean, I felt like, you know, she's like kind of begging, you know, even though it's her character Esther talking to Norman Maine, it felt like, you know, Judy Garland talking to Judy Garland, you know.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely an unhinged quality to Judy Garland's
Yeah.
performance. Really, it's very sort of captivating. But the same is true for Janet Gaynor as well in the 1937 version. She was actually on, she only made, I think, one more picture
Oh
after
wow.
Star is Born. And she actually transitioned from silent movies to the talkies.
Mm.
And yeah, and whereas March, who played Maine, he actually got a load more work. He was pretty much on the upswing. So the real
Right.
life was almost complete opposite of what was
Yeah.
produced in the story.
That's funny. Yeah, and I think that's the other part that's kind of interesting as well. Like going back or jumping a little bit ahead to the 2018 version. I
Mm,
reading about that one. Apparently, Bradley Cooper had a point that he was really down on his like. I don't know how much you know about his career stuff. I kind of knew him from where he was in Alias as a minor character and stuff,
right.
and it seemed like you know he just didn't get any breaks and everything. And apparently, you
Mm,
know, sometime around that period is when he kind of had his struggles with addiction. And so, like a lot of the reality that he brings to the screen and stuff, I mean, that's him. Like kind of, you know, he's like kind of, you know, struggled with addiction. He's kind of basically had that real low point in his career and everything like that. Until like, you know, apparently, you know, which ironically, you know, Hangover is like kind of was one of his breakout roles and stuff. Yeah, so
yeah.
ironically, right? Like, you know, here's this role that like shows like kind of going on a bender and like kind of and
This
ending
is
up
what
being
we
like
want from you, Bradley. Yeah, just keep
apparently,
doing it, Bradley. Yeah, no, I mean, I think as well as I knew him as a sort of a major star, and he was in the
okay,
A Team, and then he was like the only thing I've known him for recently is Rocket Raccoon, and so I guess if you look at your career in frame black, just like
right,
once I was like I was a leading man, and now I'm a raccoon. But but I mean, he also I mean, it was I would say for me the 2018 version. I was actually very impressed with the first 45 minutes to an hour of it. The actual rise to stardom,
mm,
Lady Gaga's performance was really, really excellent actually, and she
yeah,
does a fantastic job in that. And it's very, very captivating, compelling,
right,
very well directed. I was really actually
mm,
very impressed. It's actually for me the story started getting boring once she got famous,
mm,
and I really feel like his trajectory downwards was compelling enough for me to really
mm.
invest in him enough. But and also my pet peeve. He also studied at the Tom Hardy School of Undecipherable Dialogue for quite a lot of it as well. So that kind of annoyed me a little bit. But overall, I mean, considering it was his first movie he directed,
Mm.
I think he did a pretty solid job. Really, the first hour though, I thought was really amazing.
The thing for me personally, that I found most compelling about the 2018 version is that I have to admit that I had my kind of ideas about Lady Gaga before going into it, and where you know, like I kind of just you know occasionally heard her you know different songs that she's known for, stuff like that, and then I just thought of her as like kind of you know this kind of you know pop you know kind of music you know creation and stuff like so in other words very much the character that you know she becomes in the movie and stuff and then seeing her like kind of in this like you know minimal makeup and like kind of this you know very real kind of character kind of really like woke me up to like where now I'm a lot more interested in kind of learning more about her and stuff. And apparently, one of the things I learned was that like one of the reasons why she went into music though apparently was she was trying to become an actress, and basically they told her that she didn't have the look, she so on and so forth or like that. So here's this person, right, who said, flipped off the, establishment, so to speak, and basically made herself into who she is. And, so she essentially kind of like, just puts on all these different, costumes, elaborate costumes and, outfits and makeup and all that kind of stuff to basically make herself into, who she wants to be and stuff. And then now, the irony, of course, is like she's come back into, acting on her own terms. And I think that's a thing that like is a great kind of, flipping the script, I guess, for in this case where it kind of is beyond like, a star kind of being born and stuff, but it's like where she kind of basically a star flips off the establishment and, kind of chooses their own path and everything. Because that's one of the other kind of central ideas, of course, that we've touched on a little bit, is that pretty much besides the star is born or made is the fact that like you're chosen, right? You're kind of giving the blessing of, Hollywood to that, like, oh, you have what it takes and everything. And that's something that like we haven't touched on as much, but I think that's like a key part about all this too, is that, somebody else is deciding for you whether, you've got what it takes or something like that.
Predestined, almost like a religion, you might say. Yes. I think it was they interwove a lot of her real story into the story of the 2018 version, which was very effective, I thought. And also, one of the things I liked about this, it took them apparently almost 2 years to write all the songs and everything for the 2018 version. And the songwriting was actually a really involved process. And they actually, I think he wrote, Brad Cooper and Lady Gaga actually wrote some songs together, and they kind of made a progression over time. And they worked with, I think, some, Willie Nelson's son on a lot of the country songs. So it's definitely, you can tell they've really sort of tried to add a real level of authenticity to the music and the process behind it. And apparently I read somewhere that she asked for the songs to be recorded live on set, which may be the case for some of them. It couldn't actually be the case for some of them. But anyway, I mean, that's another kind of Hollywood story kind of thing. Right. But the other thing I really liked about that was the idea of the overnight celebrity is actually much more real these days with social media. The idea can be kind of like filmed on YouTube, Justin Bieber or whatever, and you can become a celebrity just on the basis of that. It's a much more kind of, you can have a much more meteoric rise, whereas in the previous versions you had to have a kind of a stretch of the truth or believability to get them.
Yeah, I think that's probably like a good time to talk about the 76 version, where
the 76 version, yeah.
Okay, so I feel like the strength of the version is definitely Barbra Streisand's performances, like where she's singing. Not so much necessarily the acting, but but definitely like anytime that quote unquote Babs is singing stuff like that, you can kind of see her at, where she shines and where her talent is and stuff like that. With that said, I guess, like let's kind of talk about the elephant in the room where like kind of, okay, her believability in that role as this kind of, I guess this person who falls in love with this guy that, like kind of is a rock star or something like that. And then their relationship takes off from there. Like, let's dive into that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like if you're going to remake one of the most iconic Hollywood movies as a musical again, then at least make the songs good. They're just awful. I mean, Kristofferson's rock numbers were just painful, and the fact that he had to listen to them about 3 or 4 times through the movie. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Barbra Streisand's a great performer, but I didn't think even her songs were particularly good. They were all pretty terrible, in my opinion. I was really struggling after 2 hours with that one. And also just this whole idea of she's kind of like a Burt Bacharach style lounge singer, and he's a thing. I mean, okay, yeah, maybe they've fall in love, but the fact that she could just go on the middle of his rock concert and sing like what the world needs now is, you know, it's just not gonna work, you know, in a 70s heavy rock concert. I can just see her getting like bottles of beer thrown at her. I mean, I was in my very early days, I went to a few sort of rock concerts, I guess mid to late 80s, and I guarantee you there, if that had happened, like Barbara wouldn't have made it out alive, I don't think. It just wouldn't have happened. So that for me was completely off. The other thing is, it's just their whole acting styles seemed completely at odds. She was trying to do kind of some sort of witty, sharp, fast dialogue, and he was completely committing as a kind of total kind of wasted rock star. So the dialogue had this kind of tempo shift where she was like, bada, 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 and he was like, it was just like, it was so jarring, the whole movie, and it was, I think that really threw me.
I think that's also one of those where, like, I didn't feel like there was this kind of balance, you know, like, and I'm not even sure how you could have balanced the two, because she is such a strong personality that it just would take something else to kind of, you know, be a balance there. And then meanwhile, Kristofferson, like, kind of, you know, he's you know, a great actor in his own right and stuff, but it just like kind of, it just was such a mismatch that I think, you know, like I said, it was very jarring and kind of really hard to kind of buy into that and not to kind of go, you know, how did these two end up together kind of thing and stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, the dialogue was pretty dire as well for most of the movie, in all honesty. And I think I put in the notes, like, one of the earliest appearances of Robert Englund that I know of.
Oh, right.
Known for his Freddie movies. And I really, you know, even after about 15 minutes, I was ready for him to just cut the face off Kristofferson's character, because I find it so, like, tedious. But yeah, it was just a mess of a movie, really.
And that was actually one. I was gonna say one of Gary Busey's first.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, one of the first Gary Busey roles I saw. What a ridiculous costume. I mean, the costumes in that were pretty outlandish as well. But I mean, the real reason I think it falls flat is that one of the great strengths of both the 37 and the 54 is you have this kind of machinery of Hollywood, the glitz, the glamour, this pristine kind of image that's portrayed of these people, and you have the real side of all their personal failings and the tragedy on the other side. Whereas he's already kind of like a wasted rock star who already does kind of fairly undignified things on stage. So there is none of that kind of like that, you know, that back and forth of those images. So, you know, he's a fairly unsavory character at the beginning, and he's fairly unsavory at the end. It's just like, yeah, see you later. I really didn't. But anyway, yeah, I'll stop going about the 76 version.
So I think you know, like, we'll kind of touch on, you know, the 37 version one last bit, so like that, and then we'll kind of, you know, just talk about them more in general again. Like, and I think for me, like, what is it like kind of in the 1937 version that really made it where, like, it's that kind of led to this, you know, quote unquote tradition, I guess, of, you know, this movie being remade again and again. So there's something there, right? There had to be something there that, like, kind of really made it stand out, that, like, made it memorable enough for people kind of go, you know, like, let's do another version of it and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the 37 is my favorite version of them all, mostly because it's the most sort of focused. It really does just focus on the story of the rise of one actor and the fall of the other. Right. It has the most sort of cynical characters and storyline. You know, the producer is constantly kind of, and you know, when they're about to get married, and this is the classic scene, they say, aren't you going to congratulate us? And he's saying, oh, he's thinking about what effect it's going to have on the studio. So he comes across as quite kind and gentle, but he's, you know, he's quite insidious in that he's, you know, always got the business first on his mind. And Libby is just like a really sort of foul character, even though he's the PR man who cleans things up. He's just like really, really horrendous kind of character, really. He immediately makes jokes about his death afterwards. And, you know, he's definitely the most, the harsh of all the characters. And just the whole sort of process, the fact that she even makes fun of other famous actresses at the dinner party, sort of shows you the level of sort of cynicism that's in it, which I thought was actually quite good. It's in a way that I kind of feel like the movie is somewhat of a sort of a warning to be cynical about Hollywood. It's like, you know, they're trying to sell you these sort of grandiose dreams and don't sort of buy into all this. And both Esther and Maine are kind of like the tragic people who have bought into this story. You know, Maine has bought into his own ego that he has to commit suicide, and Esther's bought into it in terms of her career and into Maine to some degree, and the sort of tragedy that's befallen them. So,
yeah, certainly, you know, Maine and Esther are the core characters in the romance, and you know, again, the star rising, the star falling, and stuff. I think what kind of also complements it, anyways, is the other characters that, like, kind of, you know, the producer, you know, possibly Libby, the PR man stuff. Kind of saw a little bit of that in the 2018 version stuff. And I feel like, you know, probably the one, it's interesting how, like, you know, I think both of us agree, like, the 76 version was the weakest one out of the, you know, the group and stuff. And that's the one where, like, you really didn't see as nearly a performance for these supporting actors and stuff. Like, in other words,
they weren't even there.
They're almost just written out in a way and stuff.
Yeah. It was so sort of like, this is a Barbra Streisand vehicle,
right?
It's a much more balanced sort of, and that starts in the Judy Garland one, but it's definitely there. And they kind of, I actually kind of like the fact that they brought Sam Elliott back in as the kind of the supporting role of the brother in the 2018 version, because again, it's the sort of familial tie is like someone who's going to be honest with the character, which is a very sort of powerful tool, I guess, in terms of storytelling for someone who's dealing with addiction. Whereas funny in the 37 is the grandmother who's the person who's the familiar one who's on the rise. So it's, you know, it's an interesting thing. The other clever thing I thought about the 2018 version was this idea of him going deaf, because that actually, the problem is with the previous ones is his own sort of addiction is his own downfall of his career, and that he's just so outlandish. But in that one, it was kind of like you managed to keep some sympathy for the character because he physically couldn't do his career anymore. So it actually helped you sort of, it helped you you didn't completely hate the character by the end of it, which I thought was a clever twist on that to do with that character. Unfortunately, I still felt sadder when Maine in the 37 died rather than the 2018 one. They did a lot of stuff to make you feel sympathy for Bradley Cooper's Maine, but I still didn't care too much, unfortunately.
I see.
Yeah, and I should say, I mean, like, I do think March, I can't remember his first name, but the guy who portrays Maine in the first one does such a fantastic job. I mean, that for me is one of the best, certainly the best version, and he's really excellent in that.
I think beyond, like, kind of the crew kind of being the ones bringing out the performances, you know, like the directors, you know, for the different versions and stuff, you know, just to kind of touch a little bit more on the supporting character, I felt like in the 54 version, you know, having a strong enough of a character as the producer, you know, like kind of, you know, like the father figure, if you will, or the second father figure besides, you know, Maine. That one, you know, like you said, was like kind of for storytelling purposes, was the person that could really be there for Garland to kind of really pour her heart out. Because she certainly couldn't do it with Maine and stuff, because, like, she had to, like, kind of put on the strong face, you know, like, kind of, that, like, oh, yes, dear, like, kind of, you know, like, you know, you'll be fine, that kind of thing stuff. But then meanwhile, you know, she could show that weakness, that vulnerability, through the producer character. And I felt like that was, like, kind of, to me, it was a great way to kind of really bring out that performance and stuff. Like, I think it just, you know, it's probably very few other ways that, you know, because it was just granted, it was a monologue in the sense that, like, she's really just almost talking to us, the audience. But the fact that, like, you know, that producer is there, and we kind of see more of a relationship between the two through the course of that movie, that made it more believable. We bought that more stuff, that performance and everything. And then at that point, it was just her, like, you know, of course, Garland, the real human being, kind of just, you know, just really a lot of ways, like, openly showing her
so vulnerability.
And her just the things that she really has gone through off the camera and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they made that. They, of course, the thing in the 37 one is they don't make you want to sympathize with her character as much as they do in the Judy Garland one. They want you to actually sort of like Judy Garland a lot more than they do necessarily Esther in the first one. I would say anyway. And of course, they do away with all that in the 76, and then kind of the 2018. I'm just you have the father again. I guess you've got the father for her, and you've got the brother for him. So they get their own kind of like supporting family kind of.
Right. They kind of almost a way split up the character again and stuff. And that's true. So,
I got
go ahead.
I've got some other interesting things that I think that's the sort of political side of things with the movie, which I thought was interesting. Was the moment where he humiliates himself in front of the awards ceremony? Because in the first two, it's him sort of like getting drunk and humiliating her in front of the Oscar judges, and then accidentally hitting her.
Right.
And then in the 76, it's at the Grammys, and he accidentally hits her.
Right.
Whereas in the 2018, it's obviously now politically unacceptable for a character to hit a woman,
right?
Especially Gaga at the Grammys, so they made him sort of wet himself.
Yeah,
and that's a very interesting statement of how like masculinity can be portrayed in the movies over the years. The other thing is the what I call the main downfall moment in the first one. He goes on like a 3-day bender, pretty much the same in the 54. In the 76, he ends up sleeping with the reporter, which is kind of seen as like the bit where we're supposed to stop caring about the character. And in the 2018 one, it's him calling Lady Gaga ugly, which, well, not Lady Gaga, the character ugly in the movie, which kind of like, that again shows you where our sensibility of what the worst behavior that's unredeemable behavior for a man over the years has happened.
That's a great point. And that's really kind of just showing how each version is a statement of its time, and it's like kind of that's something that we've talked about all the time and stuff. But it's interesting how like at each point it's always a reflection of like kind of what the sensibilities are and what like kind of what's acceptable and what's not and stuff. And I mean that's like something I think we really won't see as differently. So here's the thing too, like so let's say like kind of it's like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they make another version of stuff. What do you suppose is like kind of like will be the things that will really make it shine or like make it like kind of that will translate stuff, and what are the things that like really just wouldn't really translate as well, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it'll be a VR version and
right.
Your Instagram account will get sort of like more, or equivalent, it will get more likes how well you do in this VR experience. And that will translate directly to your bank account or something. I don't know. I'm just making shit up. So, I mean, I think it's really, for me, I really like the core idea of there's one star on the rise, one star on the fall, and you see that kind of transition and the way that kind of tragedy. You want the romance on the upswing and the tragedy and just having that good balance and having both characters, like you said, balanced and having that charisma. I think that's the core that it really needs to work around, really. Maybe not make it a musical, that may be my suggestion to a slim chance that some director in the future in 20 years is watching this, who knows?
Yeah. I mean, even though that's a tradition that Garland started, it's really not the core of the story. It's more about celebrity, like kind of, it's about fame, and about like kind of the prices of reaching that stuff. That like Granny in the 37 version kind of jokingly says, hey, you're here, you made it and stuff. This is the price you're paying and stuff. And I think that's something that, like, if anything, would at some point maybe come back, or like kind of that I can see coming back, that like a reminder about how, like kind of you may want fame, you may want fortune stuff, but there's a price. And I think that's like kind of also something like, maybe the future version might be where the celebrity is made through YouTube or something like that, where like kind of be some kind of thing through technology and stuff, not necessarily again music and everything, but the fact that like what we'll see as like kind of again like, okay, you've gotten this, what price are you willing to pay, or what do you pay for it? In each case though too, like the romance is like kind of the sacrifice too that like we see and you know, that's, I think, as much of or integral part to the story too, because there are so many of these Hollywood, you know, like kind of marriages, right? That's, you know, something we haven't talked about as much. It's like kind of that, like, there's, you know, like every other week or month you hear about another divorce and stuff. It's just, that's just as commonplace as, you know, like kind of the addiction story as well, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think they did sort of roughly touch on the technology a little bit in the 2018 version, in that they talked a little bit about the music production when they made her star, and she wanted to do it in more kind of a raw version. Or it could be, that's what I seem to recall.
Right.
And of course, there's the YouTube clip that goes viral. But I mean, I think the spirit of the 37 one, which I'd like to see carried over, is something where they're a lot more cynical and they give you more of an inside view on the industry. I think that would really be one of the most compelling things, is trying to get that kind of insider's view. And I kind of felt it may have been in 1937. That was like a real kind of, you know, eye opener for some people who went and saw that movie. They may not have realized that stars' names were made up, and that, you know, these PR people did all these things in their lives.
Right.
That's what I'd like to see. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I think, you know, just kind of worth mentioning is, like, with the 54 version, when we see those shots of the studio and stuff, I think they even call it the Cuckoo Studios, like kind of based on, you know, the characters and everything. But that's very much Warner Brothers. I mean, and what's funny is that even today, if you go on those, you know, lots, I mean, they still look like that. I mean, you know, granted, the people aren't doing musical numbers in them anymore, and the, you know, like kind of the set dressings maybe look a little bit different, but they're still very much, you know, a lot of the same lights are still there, and a lot of the, you know, like kind of just the numbers, maybe they've painted over them, but it's still like kind of, you know, if you go on Warner Brothers lots, that's still how it looks nowadays and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's a lot of things change, but, you know, some certainly don't in the industry, I guess. So.
Definitely. And I think, you know, that's probably like the other thing worth mentioning is that, like, we, you know, like, even though like the different means of, you know, celebritydom or celebritydom is going to change and stuff like that, I think that's the thing that, like, you know, when we started at the beginning, that it's going to really remain constant and stuff, is the idea that, like, we're going to have these people that we worship and we kind of like put on a pedestal and everything. And I think the other thing that, like, we haven't touched on with that is that, like, in a way, like, even though like the United States, we kind of like have democracy, we kind of ban royalty and stuff, but that's still very much our royalty and everything nowadays. That's still very much who, you know, like how we, you know, they accumulate the wealth, they have their own kind of fiefdoms carved out in our attention and everything. And I think that's like kind of what's interesting is like kind of the kingdoms now, if you will, is our attention and our, you know, besides the likes and everything like that, it's who has, you know, our, you know, that we basically clamor to catch on social media or catch a video and stuff like that. And I think that's the thing that, like, maybe will shift with technology, but that's still like kind of the core of it as well. Is like kind of just the fact that, like, there's these people that we kind of just very much revere and kind of elevate and stuff.
Oh, totally. Yeah, the kings and queens of the attention economy. You know, it's that I think, you know, Marvel, the cinematic universe, has made more than Harry Potter and Star Wars combined. As you know, as the most recent phenomenon. So it's
So yeah, I think in terms of the next shows and stuff like that, I think
yes,
we've got of course the holidays and everything. So we'll be going through a version or a round of those.
Yes, lots of Christmas movies coming up. Of course, there is also as well, I've just noticed Charlie's Angels, a remake, has just been released. We could do that one if we really feel like going through that. But yeah, there'll be plenty of merriment and ho-ho-hos as we work our way through our favorite Christmas movies.
And I'm definitely looking forward to kind of talking about Casino Royale, because for me, like, I don't know, for some reason, like, there's something about the Bond movies that, besides like their watchability overall, is that around the holidays, I feel that, I find for me anyways, that, like, I just, you know, that there's this something about, like, kind of that there's nothing better than to pop on you know, a Bond movie, just almost any one, as much as like kind of, you know, any of the other holiday you know, classics and stuff.
For those viewers not from England, virtually any public holiday involves sitting down at some point and watching a Bond movie. So
Oh, interesting.
maybe not so much these days. Maybe when they're more popular. But yeah, not a bank holiday would go past without a Bond movie being on TV. So,
Super. So yeah,
the other one I'm really interested in is. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say I really want to watch Black Christmas as well. That's the other one I really want to see, the remake
Definitely.
of and the original. So, yeah.
Alrighty, so that's all for this time. Then we're gonna basically wrap things up. I'm John Chang, and for the Dan Edmonds, and once again, thanks for watching. And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. We look forward to connecting again with you next time.